Hello, welcome to another edition of Pioneer Valley Life. I'm your host, James Sullivan. We're here in the studios of Easthampton's eMedia. My guest today is Craig Della Penna, and we're going to talk about rail trails. Welcome.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to coming here.
Good. When was the first rail trail built around here?
Oh, in the Pioneer Valley.
Yeah, we're talking the Pioneer Valley mostly, yeah.
That would probably be the one that starts at behind Stop and Shop in Northampton and goes up to Florence to Look Park. That little stretch, 2.6 miles.
Yeah.
That was the original one here in this region.
Uh-huh. Because I remember living in Amherst, probably now at least 15 years ago, and I had a bicycle. I would go over and get on right, by Amherst College and ride out towards Belchertown. Mm-hmm. And I would always go on that one because, eventually it tied in all the way into Northampton and everything. But yeah, so it's been growing, every year. And I think the usage has been growing a lot. Yes,
the network's been growing. Within 150 miles of where we're sitting today is the densest network of dead steam railroad corridor in North America.
Really?
Yes. There's nothing else like. And they didn't go to obscure, forgotten coal mine branch lines here.
Yeah.
Here we're sitting in the huge antediluvian mill complex known as East Works today.
Yeah.
That's where the railroads went, where the wealth was created in New England. The railroads went there to serve the industries. Mm-hmm. The industries are being converted to, like East Works is not alone. There's all these mill buildings are being converted to modern uses that don't require big, heavy railroad operations.
Right.
And so this is where the network is, right, where people live, work, and play.
Right, yeah. And it's, especially here in Easthampton, there's easy access to just about anybody who lives in town, that they can get to some part of the trail. I'm sure there are people that commute via their bike to Northampton to go to work. Yes,
in fact, one of my early lectures, I've given over 1,200 lectures now in 21 states since, I think my first talk was in 1996. I think it was 98, I was just thinking about it last night. I spoke in Washington, D.C. about the Nawatic Rail Trail, the one you mentioned.
Yeah.
The hard to pronounce name.
Yeah.
Ran from the Connecticut River all the way east to to about 1,300 feet into Belchertown.
Right.
And back in the late 90s, there was a plan to connect that to the university alongside University Drive to what is now called the Swift Way. Mm-hmm. There was a separate pathway that went from the rail trail all the way to the university for commuter purposes, for utilitarian purposes.
Yeah. So
I spoke at a state, or actually a national conference there, about how this trail is going to be evolving. How most trails, when they start out, they're largely about 95% recreational use, but over time they start to become more balanced, where people can actually use them to get to work for a utilitarian purpose, or even walking the dog and becoming a third place in your community. They're happening everywhere. This is simply unmatched anywhere else in the United States, what's being developed here.
And it's interesting, one of your major projects is to connect all these parts from Northampton to Boston. Mm-hmm. And there's little spots here and there that are done. There's some that haven't been done because I guess it's really up to each town to make arrangements with the rail owners to be able to have access to those spots?
It's a hodgepodge for sure. It is becoming more cohesive. There is a trails team operating from inside the governor's suite of offices. They meet twice a month, and they take down silos between agencies, because it had been embarrassing how inept it was getting these projects done. And now the state government's starting to adopt that these are very important, and they're starting to make them go forward. The Mass Central Rail Trail, there was not such a thing called like that until about 20 years ago. This has been a project that's been 42 plus years in the making. When the first instance of this was when the Nowatic Trail purchase was in 1980 by the state government, and it took them 13 years to get it built till 1993. But even at that point, there was no idea it could actually be done across the state. And there's now, right now, yesterday was another ribbon cutting in Hardwick, Gilbertville section of Hardwick.
Yep.
Now we're at 60 miles. And right now there's another 15 miles or so under construction. In 2 years, we're going to be at 75 miles. And this was completely off the charts. No one ever thought of this until it was cast out in a state report circa 1999 about trail and greenway development in the state. And it was pointed out that if there could be a focus on this, that when opportunities arose to buy corridor or help spur development, it wasn't really being taken with a real grain of popularity or seriousness. But through the years, that report was the guidebook from which everything else is happening here. So there's probably a dozen different groups operating on the Mass Central Corridor. And we rebranded it Mass Central Rail Trail. The first Golden Spike conference we had was in 1999. In 2002, we held the next one in Waltham. It was the largest Rails to Trails conference in the Northeast United States. It had 400 attendees, including gubernatorial candidates. And that sort of led itself to a group coming together under the loosely called Mass Central Rail Trail Core Coalition. So to help prop each other up, cry on each other's shoulders. There's a lot of opposition, a lot of turmoil. The state wasn't really in favor. The MBTA was being a pill. The MBTA actually owns more miles of dead railroad in Massachusetts than anyone. The second most popular owner is National Grid. And so Massachusetts collectively owns more miles of dead railroad than any other state in 50, yet we're so small. And these will never become railroads again.
No, I wouldn't think so.
I marketed rail freight for 12 years and set up some of the largest and most successful railroad-owned transloading facilities. And I know how to make a railroad work. And if it can't be a railroad, it has to become a trail.
Yeah.
Just having a dead railroad in your neighborhood will cause blight. And so this thing knit together slowly over time. And now, as I mentioned, we're at 60 miles. In a couple of years, we're going to be at 75 miles. During the pandemic, DOT became alarmed because they didn't really think it was possible to reassemble the rest. So they did a very fine, highly detailed, granular look at the missing gaps in this corridor. The west end out here is all built out. The east end is all built out or about to begin construction. It's from 495 to the west side of Belchertown. That is a lot of mysteriousness. They did a report that showed it could be reassembled, but it's going to be really expensive or complicated. And they said to me, because we have a 501c3 we repurposed from the early years of the 20th century called Nowatic Network. And we repurposed that to be not just about the westernmost 10 miles of the corridor. We repurposed Nowatic Network to be expansive along the whole corridor and raise our level of vision, our vision statement, mission statement, to be helping to reassemble the entire corridor or do betterments along the entire corridor. And we expanded our board of directors to be all along the corridor. And so we started doing more and more of these Golden Spikes events with the Mass Central Rail Trail Core. Then after 2019, we started doing them under the flag of the Nowatic Network. Our next big conference is going to be on October 14th in Natick, not directly on our corridor, but close enough where we're going to have a lot of walking and biking tours and speak time, and there's good things happening. That'll be our 9th conference. But getting back to the main point, we're at 60 miles, 75 miles. We're going to be shortly. DOT during the pandemic commissioned that granular report. I have a copy. I didn't bring a copy of that, but what they asked me, they said, we want you to tell us what it would be worth to have a 100-mile trail. We have all these short trails, but we notice around the country that when they become long and become multi-day journeys for families to stay overnight, it causes a renaissance in places that are a bit forgotten today. And so they said to us, we want you to commission a report that would give quantifiable data about what it would be worth. Because we know that this is going to be long, and we know that it intersects with several different trails. And so what we did, we created an RFP, request for proposals. We sent it off all over the country looking for a consultant who could answer the basic question, never asked before of a single rail trail ever in New England. What would this long trail be worth?
Economically.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we cast it out. 4 consultants came forward. We chose one called Kittleson and Associates out of Boston. They have their headquarters is in Portland, Oregon. They had a Boston office, and a sub-consultant called Cambridge Econometrics, which does specialty in looking at big capital expenditures by state governments to see if that projected expenditure was going to be worth it. Is it really going to get the bang for the buck? So collectively, we brought them on board, and they came on last summer. And the first phase was to do a series of interviews of people on the trail out here in Central Mass, in Eastern Mass. Did you know that this trail could be actually 100 miles long? Would that be something you'd be liking to try out, experience? And they said, oh yeah, that would be great. We had over 2,000 responses. And some of the responses were yes, no, maybe, of course. Yeah. But some of them were very, very thoughtful and really heartstring pulling conversations or comments. And I have it up on the website. I have an e-newsletter now that goes out to over 15,000 advocates and policymakers in 8 states. And it's easy to subscribe to this. There's nothing else like it. I'm involved in several wars, and it keeps my battle-hardened veterans, let's say, keeps them in the game. But this report was based around the interviews that they conducted last fall. Over the winter, they did the hard, deep dive into what would a 100-mile trail mean? Who lives along this corridor? What are the communities along the way? Are they doing well, or are they kind of threadbare and forgotten, where populist sentiment abounds? And so, what is the conditions along the corridor? We know from the DOT report there's 5 bridges over 500 feet long missing. One locally, and that was torn down, not locally to Easthampton, but not too far away, that was torn down illegally in 1980. There's several places where the corridor is washed out in the hurricane of 38. There are places, there's a 1,000-foot tunnel that needs to be renovated. Most people of the 21st century have no idea that there's a tunnel on this trail. The longest trail, second longest tunnel, railroad tunnel, the Hoosick Tunnel, which is an active railroad, that's 5,000 feet long. This one's 1,000 feet long in Clinton. And so DOT knows it can be reassembled. We produced a report that showed what it's going to be worth. You can see it shows our east-west mountain range here in our valley. This is the river, the Connecticut River at Northampton, looking at the Nawatic Rail Trail Bridge, 1,400 feet long, longest crossing of the Connecticut River. This report is only 40 pages long, filled with graphics and contemporary graphics and all sorts of statistics. And what it ends up with, it's going to produce 4 to 5 million users a year. It's going to intersect with 18 other trails, including the trail where we're sitting right here in the Eastworks building. Right behind Eastworks is the locally called Manhan Rail Trail.
Right.
It's actually got a bigger name, a higher altitude name, because at one time there was 16 different names to this corridor down to New Haven. Now it's 2 in Connecticut and 6 names in Massachusetts. And so it's been rebranded as New Haven and Northampton Canal Greenway, longest interstate trail in the Northeast. This is in this report. Collectively, all these trails that intersect with this will produce 4 to 5 million users a year. Almost two-thirds, 64% of the state's population lives within 10 miles of this corridor. There's going to be 400,000 to 500,000 overnight visitors a year. 900,000 visitors just in Worcester County, which I can say on this show, lots of people consider to be flyover country, but is really exciting, interesting places.
Right. Yeah.
And there will be a complete shock when this comes to pass. The to-do going on in Northampton right now about transportation stuff is the remake of downtown Northampton.
Yeah.
There's always talk about losing parking spaces as a result of this, or do we really need more bikeway infrastructure here? They don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
It's going to be 1 million users a year just in Northampton.
Right. Yeah.
This is big, and it's going to be very impactful. For local businesses. It's going to be good in every way. There's going to be, we know that there's going to be many new businesses siting in places that are threadbare and sort of run down right now. Happens everywhere. A long trail gets built.
Yeah.
It causes a renaissance. Doesn't have to be gentrification on steroids or anything like the High Line in New York City. It'll be more gentle, and it'll be more normal, but there'll be no more threadbare places once this gets built out.
Right. Because it's, I ride on the trails. I have a electric bike, which, that helps me be out there.
Yes.
If it wasn't for the electric bike, I don't think I'd be riding these days. But the electric bike is great. I see a lot of electric bikes on the trail. But, you also see walkers with dogs, runners, all sorts of people using the space. And now and then it's pretty tight, but I mean most people respect the lanes of going in each direction and know to warn people up ahead that they're going to be coming by and things. So it's the etiquette has been established and most people follow it.
Well, what's very special about these places, and it didn't really become apparent until there were maybe a few hundred of them built. They started noticing changes in communities. The third stage or third place in the community. The first place in your life is your family. The second place is your workplace. The third place, which is was lacking in a lot of places, used to be like, I don't know, maybe the VFW or the tavern locally or some other place of that sort. And but now it's the rail trail in lots of places is the third place. You'll see people outside of the first 2 places that becomes a gathering point in communities.
And, And, the businesses you see here in Easthampton and other towns and other places, Hadley, there are a lot of businesses that are right on the trail. And they offer a variety of services. Obviously, there's a lot of bicycle shops, but there's also, we've got Tandem Bagel here in Easthampton that's right on the trail.
Yeah.
And these other places that, even here in this complex of all these buildings here with a couple of the local breweries in the back, are accessible. All the stores in Hadley, so it's like you say, it has an economic impact. It's not just people riding bikes through. They like to stop. If somebody's going to ride, even 20, 30 miles, they want to stop. They're not going to go 20 miles, turn around and go back 20 immediately.
Right.
Most people aren't, so they'll drive along and say, oh, there's some ice cream place, or there's this or that, so like you say, that has an economic impact as well. Because these businesses, somebody's driving a car on Route 9, they're probably not going to stop at the same places, and they might not even know they're there. but somebody who's riding a bike within 10 feet of the place is certainly going to know they're there.
That's right. They're little economic engines. You know, there's a place in southwestern Virginia back in the days, in the early 70s. There was a corridor that was kind of famous as a place where it was called the Creeper, the Virginia Creeper Train Trail. And it was a steep grade in southwest Virginia. There was a famous photographer, actually, a commercial photographer, O. Winston Link, was hired by the railroad to catalog the last days of operation of the steam train there. And it only ran during the day. And so he was there taking pictures. And when it went away, the National Park Service proposed to both North Carolina and Virginia to make it into a trail, kind of a national park example. And Virginia was all on board. For North Carolina was fearful of it, and they turned it down. They thought it was a scary thing, and they didn't want to deal with it at all, so they turned it down. But you go there today, and it tells a telling tale. You go there, and it's 38 miles long, and it starts at the western end is Abingdon, Virginia. In the middle is Damascus, Virginia, and at the eastern end is White Top Mountain. It's the highest point of a scheduled railroad in the eastern United States when it ran. And there's Damascus, Virginia, is a place they call themselves Trail Town, and it's completely intact, thriving, no blight, no gentrification on steroids, just normalcy with locally owned small businesses. And they'll take you and your bike 17 miles to the White Top Mountain. Upgrade, 6% upgrade. And then you'll disembark and you'll ride downhill to Damascus and then on to Abington, which is a very, very commercial, like a county seat kind of town. But it's well loved. There is no rural blight, as I mentioned. But if you go across the border, the few hundred yards, a couple of miles into North Carolina, and it's pretty run down and threadbare. And so these are projects that there's a track record, and that thing is only 36, 38 miles long, and it's a great example of how to keep a renaissance going in small towns that are.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as you said, all over the country there are rail trail enthusiasts who will travel to different states in a summer vacation just to ride a trail that they've read about. So,
the Trails Conservancy, which was founded from the experience of a real rail trail war on Cape Cod and Falmouth Woods Hole, a guy who grew up there, and his mother led the effort to get the trail built. He later became an attorney working for the National Wildlife Federation, the hunters' lobbyist organization, fielding calls from hunters in the Midwest. Come out here where we hunt partridge and grouse. The farmers are obliterating those old dead railroad rights-of-way and making them farm fields. We want to preserve that where we hunt the partridge and grouse. And so he thought there would be a need for a clearinghouse of information, so that's what got created. Rails to Trails Conservancy is a clearinghouse of information on how to do this stuff. And I worked for them for several years, and now I'm a realtor, and I specialize in the sale of houses near rail trails.
And you have one?
Yes, I live 8 feet from one of the trails. My wife and I operate a bed and breakfast there, and make room nights available when I go into wars, and offer up to people that are fearful of this coming. I'll offer up a weeknight so they can wake up to the laughter of children biking to school. And how many kids bike to school in your town, I'd say. But this is spreading across the country. And as I mentioned earlier, in Massachusetts, it's the densest network of dead steam railroad corridor in North America. This is happening everywhere.
I think we're really lucky here in the Pioneer Valley with the amount of trails that we actually have here in this area. You know, and they're slowly expanding, connecting. I know on the Northampton, New Haven Greenway, one of the next ones is Southampton. You know, so I know where the trail ends now, and then you can see the old rail bed. I guess they're doing some research on that now.
Well, here's what's going on there. That's how I got involved in the politics of this. I was only about railroad history and writing books that were detailed in that realm. But the railroad company I worked for, they owned the corridor in Southampton, actually in Easthampton here, and they sold it to Easthampton. Easthampton was on board early on and no problems. But Southampton saw it as a scary thing, and it was kind of a newfangled idea and easy to vote down at town meetings, scary kind of newfangled things. And I went to that last town meeting, they voted it down, and I was stunned. It was actually the only town in 84 miles in 2 states to vote down the trail. And so when I left, I said to the folks opposed, I said, I'll be back and we're going to get this built one day. I'll be back. And I came back in 10 years later and gave it some time to settle, let the dust settle. And I went in and with some friends in Southampton, we created a group called Friends of the Southampton Greenway. And the railroad still wanted to sell the corridor, but we had to get the town to yes. And the way we did that was through the drip method, which means that we held a meeting every month at the local library, and we would then go bring in a speaker each month from a community that looked like, felt like, was like Southampton, and how they got their trail built. Month after month, drip after drip. The folks on the committee back then said, you know, we think we're ready to go to town meeting on this. And they did, and it passed.
Right.
That was in 2010. Now they have purchased the corridor at the end of 2012. They purchased it, and they're now building it out, the section from the end of the Manhan Trail, which is actually 350 feet into Southampton.
Yeah.
And then going all the way down to Brickyard Road, crossing at Route 10 by the the ice cream place down there.
Yeah.
And that is where they're going to build out the first section. As part of the 10 years of extra discussions here to get the trail purchased, the railroad didn't want to just end there, the sale of the court. They wanted everything. The railroad sold everything to the town of Southampton, right down to the Westfield line. And so they are building out the northern half of that early. The rest of it will be done later.
Right.
There will be a temporary pathway built along Route 10 to connect into Westfield, but it will not be as nearly as popular as just going straight down the dead railroad all the way into Westfield, and then low volume country roads through Westfield Center.
Yeah.
And so that's what's underway right now.
So just to review a little bit, 2 of your major projects that you're advocating for in general for rail trails is the one that's going to run from Northampton to Boston as a complete trail at sometime.
Yes,
and then there's the Northampton New Haven Greenway Trail. So those are 2 major projects. And one of the benefits of your newsletter is that you always have links to things that are going on in the towns that make up this, because it's like, you know, there's not just one agency that can make all the decisions from Northampton to Boston. There's many, many individual ones, and they're all in different stages. So, and your newsletter is great because it'll do that. It features stories on different towns and what they're doing, and so people should get a hold of that newsletter, and also just go for a ride on a rail trail someday and find out more. And if you have a guest that's coming to the area who's a rail trail enthusiast, they should call you and stay at your B&B.
Well, thank you. We are having lots of fun. You don't quit your day job for a 2-room bed and breakfast, but we make it available for people opposed. And we make, I get several real estate transactions from people who come to our beautiful valley. They love it so much they want to relocate here.
Okay, well, thanks very much for being my guest today. This has been really informative about rail trails. Thank you.